Climate change is here, it's permanent, and we caused it. The stark warning from the world's leading scientists. Within 2 decades, temperatures are on course to rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, bringing heat waves, droughts and floods.
The world listened, but didn't hear. The world listened, but it didn't act strongly enough. And as a result, climate change is a problem that is here now. Nobody's safe, and it's getting worse faster.
Greece, one of many countries already feeling the impact with raging wildfires that have driven thousands from their homes. But there is some hope. We can stop the most destructive effects of climate change if governments act now to make deep cuts to carbon emissions. Also tonight, documents obtained by the BBC suggest David Cameron made around £7 million from the failed finance company Greensill. Celebrations as Scotland lifts almost all its remaining coronavirus restrictions. And a hero's welcome for the last of the Team GB athletes to return home from success in Tokyo.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Lionel Messi leaves Barcelona after 21 years, but will he land at Charles de Gaulle Airport to play at Paris Saint-Germain?
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. We are changing the Earth's climate in unprecedented and irreversible ways, risking widespread devastation, heat waves, floods and droughts. Today's report from the International Panel on Climate Change, a group of the world's leading scientists, warns climate change is happening now and it is unequivocally the result of human activity. The head of the UN has called it Code Red for humanity. It warns that temperatures are on course to rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels within the next 2 decades. Sea levels have risen 3 times more quickly compared to the previous century. But in a small message of hope, the report concludes it's not too late to stop the worst effects of climate change, provided governments around the world make deep and immediate cuts in carbon emissions. Here's our science editor, David Shulman.
As the world gets hotter, it's becoming more threatening. With terrifying scenes of mass escapes from Greek islands, burning amid heat waves, just as devastating fires also hit California. And the new report from the UN Climate Panel says there will be much more of this to come.
With every additional amount of global warming,
this major study concludes that temperatures are rising and that it's beyond doubt that human activity is driving them up. And all the warnings so far have been ignored.
The world listened, but didn't hear. The world listened, but it didn't act strongly enough. And as a result, climate change is a problem that is here now. Nobody's safe, and it's getting worse faster.
People in every region of the world are now feeling the impacts of more violent weather, fueled by the gases that we release into the atmosphere.
There's an absolute fact that human influence is warming the climate. And that's a very stark reminder that it is our activities which are changing the climate and affecting these extreme weather events. And as the planet continues to warm, these consequences just get worse.
And the scientists are more certain of all this because they've got satellites spotting in minute detail how the planet is changing. And teams of researchers out in the toughest conditions, gathering data to help work out what's likely to come next. The big question is how much more the planet will heat up in the coming decades, so scientists explored different scenarios. In 2 of them, there are rapid and deep cuts in carbon emissions, and although the temperature does rise to potentially damaging levels, it's just about within the limits set by the international community. But in 2 other scenarios, which are actually much closer to where we're heading right now, the increases are much more dangerous. And in the most extreme, where emissions just keep growing, things become, well, catastrophic. But the message is that there is still time to act.
in one sentence, this report shows that human action have got us to where we are, but human action can also crucially decide how the future will look like. We are not doomed.
There is a lot we can all do, like this project in Cambridge, to fit shades to keep the sun off the windows.
This problem's only going to get worse with climate change. We're going to have, I fear, more and more heat waves, and they're going to be worse and worse. So that's why I think it makes sense to shade your windows now, start learning how to adapt.
But some changes will be far tougher to deal with. The oceans will keep rising. We just don't know how much. The scientists are warning that there's going to be some rise in sea level, really whatever we do. Maybe 0.5 metre by the end of the century if emissions are brought under control, or 1 metre if they aren't, and that would be really devastating for millions of people on coastlines around the world. But they can't rule out a far bigger rise, approaching 2 metres, if the polar ice sheets collapse. The great ice sheets are already adding to the level of the sea, but this process may suddenly accelerate. Scientists aren't sure, but the implications would be disastrous. India is now in the grip of flooding. Higher seas would make it worse. The science has never been so clear that we can head off the worst of climate change, but not all of it. So we urgently need to get ready. David Shukman, BBC News.
As we've heard, the effects of climate change are already being felt around the world. After its most severe heatwave in 30 years, Greece is continuing to battle raging wildfires on the country's second largest island, Evia. More than 600 firefighters, some of them from the UK, are trying to control blazing forests which have destroyed homes and businesses. More than 2,000 people have been evacuated from Evia, from where our Europe correspondent Bethany Bell reports.
Fires rage on in Evia. It's been a week and they're still not under control here. Greece is experiencing its worst heat wave in decades. The searing temperatures and scorching winds mean these forests are like a tinderbox. The flames leave behind a ghostly landscape, white with ash.
The fire swept through these hills, killing the trees. And this is what has been left behind, wreckage and destruction. The ashes are still smouldering. The ground beneath my feet is hot from the blaze.
Vangelis has come to check up on his family's farm. It belongs to his son-in-law, who's off fighting the fires. Their flock of 2,000 sheep and goats used to graze on this hillside. Now, all lost in this disaster. He says he's never experienced a fire like this before.
Climate change, in my opinion, is hurting the entire planet, and especially these forests, which are flammable. The authorities certainly haven't handled this very well, but the fire was our destiny. No one could have put it out.
Dozens of wildfires have broken out across Greece in recent days. The Prime Minister says climate change is to blame.
We have an obligation to shield the country from climate change. I'm not looking for excuses. We have made important strides in organising the country, but that's not enough when you are faced with a phenomenon of such magnitude.
In some areas of Evia, the fires only stopped when they reached the sea. Many locals say they've been abandoned. They say the authorities haven't done enough to protect the forests and their homes. And with temperatures rising, there are fears of more wildfires like this in the years to come.
Greece's Prime Minister says there have been almost 600 fires across the country in recent days. He's promised compensation for people who've lost their property and their homes, and he's also promised funds for reforestation. Meanwhile, here on Evia, firefighters are facing another difficult night, and people are just hoping and praying that these fires will be put out soon and this choking smoke that clouds the air will disappear.
Bethany on Evia, thank you. The UK is committed to cutting emissions by 78% by 2035. And in November, Britain will host a key climate conference, COP26, in Glasgow, where it hopes to persuade the international community to sign up to meaningful measures to reduce greenhouse gases. Our political correspondent Chris Mason looks at the challenges facing the government, both on the international stage and closer to home.
Is this the sight and sound of the future under construction? At this factory in Lytham in Lancashire, they make heat pumps, a greener alternative to a gas boiler. But putting them in can be a lot of hassle, and you need lots of insulation so they're effective. One example of the changes some say will soon be essential. How scared should people be? Scared about what they read in this report and scared about what changes in their lives might have to happen?
They need to understand the consequences of us not collectively taking all the right actions. But ultimately, of course, many of these actions come down to governments. It comes down to businesses who are stepping forward and playing their part in terms of going to net zero. And of course, in each of our lives, we can take actions as well.
It's not just abroad that we're seeing more extreme weather more often. From Glasgow last week to London a few days before, we see it here too. One group of international companies is working together to try to drive down their emissions. Are you optimistic about the future?
Am I optimistic? I'm optimistic that we can take action and that there's a lot of will to do that. But I think a report like this shows you that this is about fighting as hard as we can to give ourselves the best chance. It's as good as it's been for as long as I can remember that people are wanting to take action on it. But I think we're a little bit away from saying that we can be optimistic.
The scale of what faces the government here is colossal. Not only banging heads together around the world ahead of this climate summit in a few months' time, but also making the case here that the costs and changes are worth it, especially as critics say that government ministers themselves are not doing enough. The hydrogen strategy we're still awaiting, the heating and building strategy still not with us, Treasury review during the spring still not with us, Number 10's net zero strategy expected later in the year. Wouldn't your job be easier if the rest of the government got on with what it was meant to be doing?
Well, I am confident that we will deliver on all of these commitments before COP26, and I'm throwing the kitchen sink at this, Chris, I can tell you, to make sure that we get success at COP26.
This is the challenge of our time, with practical consequences for us all. Delivering change quickly and affordably won't be easy. Chris Mason, BBC News.
Well, let's return now to our science editor, David Shipman. David, there have been very serious reports before. I mean, this is certainly the most apocalyptic in tone. What evidence is it that the governments around the world will do enough quickly enough to stop the worst effects of climate change?
Well, interestingly, they've all approved this document. I mean, the Saudis, the Russians, everybody, the big fossil fuel economies had the right to scrutinise the text before it was released and have endorsed it. But whether that translates into real action by any of them remains to be seen. I mean, we know that America under Joe Biden, the world's number 2 emitter, has said that they'll halve emissions by 2030. China, the world's biggest emitter, has said it'll be carbon neutral by 2060. But we just get a report that it's reopening old coal mines because there's demand for coal surging. I think the real test will come in November in Glasgow at the COP26 summit. You'll get the world leaders round the table and we'll really see if they're prepared to act on what is obviously very, very clear science, or whether they'll talk about acting and not really give any proper commitments. And
you've covered this subject for a long time, David, and you've read many previous reports, but this one is on an entirely different level.
It is. Over the last, nearly 20 years, effectively been a witness to the progress of science, because over that time, we've seen these reports go from being really cautious. You know, we think temperatures are rising, possibly there's a human factor involved, we're not entirely sure, gradually getting firmer until today, when those sort of caveats and qualifications just seem to have gone. I mean, the phrase "we're virtually certain" is littered through the report. The scientists are extremely confident. They've got enough data now. They understand how the climate system works, enough of it to be able to be categoric about the fact that, yes, temperatures have risen, yes, they'll go up further, and yes, human activity is involved. So it's a huge shift to have witnessed in that time.
David, thank you. And for details on how each of us can play our part and cut our contribution to carbon emissions, head to our website. That's bbc.co.uk/news. Documents obtained by BBC Panorama suggest David Cameron made around £7 million from Greensill Capital before the controversial finance company collapsed. It was at the centre of controversy when it emerged the former Prime Minister had lobbied the government on behalf of the company during the pandemic. He has repeatedly refused to tell MPs what he was paid by Greensill. The company went into administration in March this year, and investors are facing billions of pounds of losses. A spokesman for Mr Cameron said his remuneration was a private matter. Andrew Verity reports.
Lex Greensill was the banker at the heart of David Cameron's government. He had his own office at number 10. 2 years after David Cameron left Downing Street, he went to work for his friend's firm.
Greensill, changing finance to change the world.
Mr Cameron travelled the world promoting Greensill Capital. With David Cameron on board, it sold more than $14 billion of investments.
Having an ex-Prime Minister is a great way to open doors. He played a really crucial role in getting Greensill in front of the right sort of people, which meant that they could get access to more money, more funding, big investors.
When Greensill Capital went bust in March, those investors were left facing billions in losses. But the man who set it up isn't short of cash. Lex Greensill took at least $40 million out of his company, based at these offices in the West End of London, and his family trust took millions more. Our former Prime Minister also had a bumper payday. Panorama has obtained a letter from Greensill to Mr Cameron. It suggests David Cameron pocketed $4.5 million after cashing in Greensill shares in 2019. Before tax, including his salary and bonus, it looks like he made around $10 million, or £7.5 million, for 2.5 years part-time work.
It was all about making money. And I think the danger is that Cameron looks like he just saw the dollar signs.
Mr Cameron has already been criticised for sending 56 messages and emails lobbying for Greensill to be included in the government's coronavirus lending schemes. Mr Cameron's spokesman says he acted in good faith at all times and there was no wrongdoing in any of the actions he took. Lex Greensill says the investments are covered by insurance that should cover 100% of any shortfall. But Panorama understands that Greensill's main insurer may not pay up. Investors could face huge losses, while David Cameron and his friend have made a fortune. Andy Verity, BBC News.
You can watch more on Panorama tonight on BBC One at 7:35. And the time has just gone at 6:15. Our top story this evening. A warning from the world's leading scientists that climate change is already here, it's permanent, and time is running out to stop it getting dramatically worse. Also tonight, cheers for Team GB's golden couple, the Kennys, as the last of the athletes come home from Tokyo.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News channel, netball bids for a place at the 2032 Olympics. We'll speak to the England head coach about why the sport should make the Games.
Almost all Scotland's remaining coronavirus restrictions have been lifted. It means an end to social distancing and limits on indoor gathering, although the wearing of masks is still compulsory in some public spaces. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, says it's the right moment to try to get back to normality, while warning people the pandemic is not over. Lorna Gordon has more, and her report contains some flashing images.
Back on stage at the Edinburgh Fringe and ready to welcome bigger crowds. It's a big day for the cast here and the country, as nearly all of Scotland's COVID restrictions are lifted. The show expanding its audience overnight.
If we were going to keep to the 200 audience, it would be very tough for us. When we heard the announcement that we could increase the numbers to 400, it was amazing because all the cast, we had tears from the cast. 400 is still a reduced capacity, but we think that it will still keep our audience and ourselves COVID compliant.
Venues, bars, restaurants are no longer having to limit their numbers, but many are choosing to hang back. This restaurant and bar saying some of the new rules aren't clear.
I know a lot of people much prefer the safety of table service, masks when moving around the building, not being crammed in with 40 people around you like sardines.
But you could, in theory, now serve people at the bar.
We can serve people at the bar, it's whether or not they can stand there and drink for an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. We're not certain about that, so we're not going to bother.
Life in Scotland will feel more normal than at any time since March last year. But the Scottish Government isn't calling it Freedom Day. They say it's far too early to say we're free from the virus. So some restrictions will remain. Masks are still mandatory here on public transport and in shops. And office workers in Scotland are being told, where possible, they should still work from home.
We know that lifting restrictions gives the virus more opportunities to spread, so there's always a degree of nervousness about that. But equally, I know we can't keep legal restrictions on people's lives forever, so we've got to try to do these things at the right moment and as carefully as possible.
At a minute past midnight, clubbers celebrated as their favourite nightclubs reopened after more than a year of being closed.
I had to spend my 20th in St Andrews alone, and I'm finally here with all my friends, and I'm so happy.
I think it's a little bit irresponsible that everything's opening this soon, but I'm not going to ignore the chance to come and have a good time.
The government here is warning that some of the few remaining restrictions could continue through the winter, in the hope that any increase in cases can be controlled and further lockdowns can be avoided. Lorna Gordon, BBC News.
The latest government coronavirus figures show there were more than 25,161 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 27,747 new cases per day in the last week. 37 deaths were recorded in the last 24 hours. That's an average of 88 a day in the last 7 days. 89% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab, and nearly 75% are fully vaccinated. The president of Belarus has told the BBC that Britain can choke on the economic sanctions it's imposed on his country in response to alleged ongoing human rights abuses. Speaking at a press conference 1 year since securing a sixth term in a presidential election that many view as fraudulent, Alexander Lukashenko called Britain America's lapdog and denied his authoritarian government had used torture and violence to silence dissent. Our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg reports.
He called it the big conversation. In the end, it was very big. For more than 8 hours, Alexander Lukashenko was live on TV, his first major news conference since the 2020 presidential election in Belarus, a vote he's widely believed to have rigged. He claimed the election had been transparent and democratic, and that after the vote, there had been no repression. But over the last year, the images from Belarus have told a very different story. The authorities have used violence and intimidation to suppress dissent, to silence those who have accused Mr. Lukashenko of stealing the election. Police detained thousands of protesters. In Belarus, there are thought to be more than 600 political prisoners. Today, Britain, America and Canada imposed more sanctions on Minsk. My colleague Sarah Rainsford asked Mr. Lukashenko for his reaction.
You can choke on those sanctions there in the UK. For 1,000 years we didn't even know Great Britain existed, and we don't want to know now. You are America's lapdogs.
It's dramas like this one that have cemented Mr. Lukashenko's reputation as Europe's last dictator. In May, he forced a Ryanair jet flying from Greece to Lithuania to land in Minsk so he could arrest an opposition blogger. And last week, the death of a Belarusian dissident in Kiev prompted more international scrutiny of Mr. Lukashenko's government. He denies any connection to that death, but he had this warning to the West. Your accusations and your sanctions will end badly for you.
You are risking starting World War III. Is that what you are trying to push us and the Russians into? What do you want? Do you want to win this war? There will be no winners. And if there are, it will be not you.
continued defiance from the leader who's made his country a pariah in the West. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Vodafone has become the second UK mobile phone network to reintroduce roaming charges for customers travelling in Europe. Charges of at least £1 a day will be applied to new contracts from January. EE was the first to announce in June that it is reintroducing the charges. The Queen has congratulated the nation's Olympic competitors, saying their hard work has been an inspiration to us all. Her message comes as many of the Team GB's athletes have landed back in the UK at the end of their success in the Tokyo Olympics. The team equalled its tally from London 2012, winning 65 medals, including 22 golds. Our sports correspondent Eleanor Roper was at Heathrow to greet them, and her report contains some flashing images.
Touchdown from Tokyo. After a games like no other, it's a welcome home like no other too. Britain's most successful couple ever and first off the plane, Jason and Laura Kenny. With family and friends unable to travel to Japan, today the first day that many athletes have been reunited with their loved ones.
How does it feel to be home? Oh, it's the best feeling in the world, honestly. I've missed these lot so much. I went there, you know, with dreams. I'll come back and this is what it's all about, these lot here.
Oh, it was just absolutely amazing, unbelievable. I didn't expect there to be such a huge reception. Obviously I was looking forward to seeing my family, but I don't think I kind of understood how much it would mean to me seeing them again after so long. So I just don't think I could be happier right now.
Along with cyclists, boxers and pentathletes, this plane was carrying 8 golds, 9 silvers and 3 bronze medals. That's 10 kilos of extra weight. Lauren Price, the last to capture gold for Team GB.
What do you think this will mean to your nan? Because I know you're very close. She wasn't able to be there in Japan.
I spoke to her every night on FaceTime. She sends me inspirational text messages before my fights, and yeah, she's over the moon. And every time I speak to her, she gets emotional.
But without a doubt, the most support today at Heathrow was for Galal Yafai, also a boxing gold medalist, his brothers and mates out in force.
An amazing performance. You've had so much support at home. How hard was it competing in Tokyo without anyone there to watch you?
You know what, to be fair, I didn't really mind. I was just happy just to get there and just get fighting. It's probably better that no one's there, it didn't distract me.
What's next for you? Are you going to turn professional?
That's the plan, yeah.
Okay, it's exciting. Straight away, you think?
I'll have a little rest, just relax and then, yeah.
So herein ends this summer's Olympic Games, a Games many thought would never happen. Despite the empty stadiums and coronavirus restrictions, Tokyo 2020 providing a much-needed lift for us all. Eleanor Roper, BBC News.
Congratulations to all of them. Let's take a look at the weather now with Darren Bett. And of course, Darren, we've been talking about climate change at the top of our programme, and you're seeing the effects of that with the weather on a daily basis.
Yes, we are. We've had some more downpours again today, Fiona. I'm going to start with a dramatic picture taken by one of our weather watchers here in the central belt of Scotland, where it has been very wet today. We've also had a band of rain that's been nudging its way down across the London area as well. And that rain that we've had in London stretches all the way back in this line towards the West Country. I've got the lightning dancing on there. We've got a few thundery downpours across Northern Ireland and still across some central and southern parts of Scotland. So some wet weather around today, and it's going to turn wetter in the next few hours across the Midlands, Lincolnshire and across towards East Anglia. But generally those showers will fade away slowly overnight. We'll have some clearer spells developing and temperatures will remain in double figures, typically at 12 or 13 degrees. Now, we could start with a few early showers in northern England, perhaps on Tuesday, but it's going to be a drier, sunnier day on Tuesday. The odd rogue shower can't be ruled out in Wales, more especially some eastern parts of England, but the bulk of the showers will be in Scotland, probably further north than today, mind you. We will see a bit more cloud coming into parts of Northern Ireland, but ahead of it, sunnier skies. The winds will be light. It's going to be a warmer day tomorrow. Temperatures will be higher at 22 or 23 degrees, and that's a bit more like it really for this time of the year. As we head into the middle of the week though, we look out into the Atlantic. This low pressure is somewhere away. It's pushing well ahead of it though, that weather front there, and that will bring cloud and some rain back into Northern Ireland on Wednesday and into Scotland, particularly Western Scotland. Ahead of it, a
few showers for Wales, Western England, but across the Midlands, Eastern England, it's going to be dry. There'll be some sunshine, a bit more of a southerly breeze. That will bring us a bit more warmth. Temperatures getting into the mid-20s. Cooler under the rain, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland. I'm going to move things on into Thursday because that rain just jumps away into England and Wales, but there's not much rain left at all on that weather front there. To the north, it's slightly cooler air. There'll be some sunshine. The winds pick up in the northwest, blowing in some showers as well. But ahead of this rain, what's left of the rain, we're in the warmer air still across East Anglia and the southeast, and temperatures could reach a high of 26 degrees. That's probably the peak of the heat over the week ahead. Fiona.
Darren, thanks very much. A reminder of our top story this evening. Climate change is here, it's permanent, and we caused it. The stark warning from the world's leading scientists. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me, and on BBC One, we can join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.